Hello, I wanted to explain a couple of things about the beds I've just built in the previous videos. First, why did I build them rather than growing crops in beds with no edges? And secondly, why did I build them this size? I originally started growing directly in the ground, and my plan was to build the soil gradually using mulch rather than bringing in lots of compost from outside. The compost needs to be topped up each year, so buying in compost can get expensive, especially if you have a lot of beds, and the taller your raised beds, the more compost you need. I wanted to work with the soil and improve it year by year by applying mulch, which the soil life would incorporate into the soil and improve the soil structure. It's a long and slow process, but it will pay dividends in time. If you've watched my earlier videos, you'll know that we are blessed with an abundance of all manner of weeds. Many of them perennials with deep roots that had to be dug up before planting could start. I'm a great believer in mulch to keep weeds down. It's the best way of stopping weed seeds germinating and can slow down existing weeds. My plan was to mulch the paths with wood chips and the beds with greener material such as grass and clippings mixed with finer wood chips. To be effective, these have to be applied thickly. Big pieces of wood chips can take a lot of time to break down and can rob nitrogen from the soil if they get mixed in, so we don't want too much of them in the bed. The problem was that greener material was scarce and was applied thinly or not at all, so the thicker layer of wood chips from the paths would spill onto the beds as I walked around. Also, the local wildlife liked to dig and play in the wood chips and throw it into the beds. This made things difficult and created a problem that the edges needed to be constantly maintained and thick wood chips retrieved from the growing areas. In the end, I decided to build a barrier between the two to make life easier for myself, to keep things neat and tidy. I'm trying to make the allotment low maintenance, so having beds with no defined edge and having to maintain the edges made things difficult, so building beds with edges became necessary. My beds are 1.5 meters wide, which is wider than the usual 1.2 meter or 4-foot beds. The 50 centimeter paths in between are wide enough for walking between the beds. This allows the optimal use of space and gives more growing space than 1.2 meter beds. I was fortunate enough to find pallets that were this size, so I didn't have to cut them to size. These raised beds are not the normal taller raised beds, which is filled with lots of compost and other materials. Here I'm working with a native soil and using mulch to improve it year by year, so I didn't need a tall bed. A height of just 10 centimeters, which is the width of a piece of pallet wood, was enough to keep the wood chips out of the growing area. In future, I could make these beds taller by adding another layer to the existing bed. Building the beds was fine, but levelling the beds was a problem as the ground is sloping down to the east and south. On tall raised beds it's not an issue, but with these short beds one end could be almost buried to let the other end touch the ground. I tried to follow the contour of the ground as much as possible and did the best I could, but if you put a spirit level on the beds, the top is higher than the bottom. But it's an allotment, so if it works, that's what's important. Well, I hope that explains a couple of things that I didn't cover in the other videos. If you have any comments or questions, please let me know in the comment section below and I will answer them. Goodbye for now and come back soon.